Chapter 1. The headless portrait. The rain beat a nervous staccato against the stained glass windows of Ainswick Hall, turning the lush English countryside into a watercolor blur of emerald and slate. Inside, the grand estate was abuzz not with the laughter of weekend guests, nor with the familiar clatter of silver in the dining room, but with an atmosphere crackling on the edge of panic. At the heart of the commotion, in the marbled portrait gallery, a ghastly tableau had seized the household in its grip. Where once hung the celebrated painting Lady Ameline in lilac, the pride of the Marshwood collection, and a fixture in art catalogues across Europe, there was now only a grotesque ruin. The canvas remained in its heavy gilt frame, but the portrait's face had been slashed clean away. Gone, too, were the delicate hands, so often admired for their lifelike rendering. In their place, gaping holes revealed nothing but the pale blue damask wall. A headless, handless Lady Ameline stared blankly over the shocked assembly. Lady Marshwood, resplendent in a silk housecoat that could not conceal her trembling hands, stood before the destruction, one gloved fist pressed to her lips. Her eldest son, Rupert red-haired, restless, his eyes darting from guest to guest, paced the length of the gallery, jaw clenched. In a corner, the housekeeper, Mrs. Prentice, mopped at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with violets. The police constable, summoned from the village, hovered awkwardly, already overwhelmed by the array of personalities now gathered in the once serene room. "It's an outrage," thundered Colonel Battersby, a neighbor and old family friend, his bristling mustache quivering with indignation. "Who would do such a thing? And why?" His glance flickered with suspicion to each member of the house party, a motley assembly brought together for Lady Marshwood's annual autumn gathering. Among them was Miss Beatrice Rowland, the enigmatic art historian with a reputation for unearthing forgeries, who had arrived from Paris the previous evening. Next to her, Edward Lang, a family cousin and celebrated playwright, seemed unable to decide whether to express outrage or bemusement. Young Sophie Marshwood, Lady Marshwood's daughter, shrank into her armchair, clutching a yellowed copy of The Secret Garden, eyes wide as if witnessing a scene from a Gothic novel. But it was Mrs. Prentice who finally broke the hush. "The doors were locked all night, madam," she whimpered. "Only you and the master have keys to the gallery." Her gaze fell guiltily to the floor. "And, perhaps, Mr. Rupert sometimes, when he wishes to." Lady Marshwood silenced her with a glance. "Enough, Prentice. The police will sort it out." Constable Rowley, clearing his throat, addressed the group with forced bravado. "Theft, certainly, or attempted. But why destroy the portrait? What value is that?" "It's not theft," said Miss Rowland, her voice level, eyes narrowed as she studied the slashed canvas. "It's a message, a very deliberate one." She leaned closer, examining the exposed wood behind the frame, the knife marks clean and purposeful. "Whoever did this wanted more than the painting. They wanted to erase her Lady Ameline herself from memory." A shiver rippled through the room. Lady Marshwood's knuckles whitened on the back of her chair. "That's quite enough, Miss Rowland." Rupert approached the ruined painting, his brow furrowed. "Mother, this isn't a burglary. Whoever did this knew precisely what they were doing and who they meant to hurt." A crack of thunder underscored his words. In the flash of lightning, the gallery's other portraits seemed to lean in, listening. Generations of Marshwood's judges, generals, and poets looked down with impassive eyes. Outside, the wind whipped the branches of ancient oaks, battering the windows in a frantic tattoo. From the doorway, a new figure appeared, half hidden in the gloom. Lucian Foster, the family's solicitor, adjusted his spectacles, his face grave. "If I might speak," he began, voice careful and dry, "it would be unwise to speculate before all the facts are known. The insurance for the Marshwood collection is significant, but—" He hesitated. "This is no ordinary crime. The head and hands, those are the identifying marks of Lady Evelyn. If the painting is ever recovered, it would be nearly impossible to prove its provenance now." Lady Marshwood swayed, and Mrs. Prentice hurried to support her. "Are you unwell, madam?" She shook her head, but her lips trembled. "No, Prentice, I will not faint. I am simply overwhelmed." Her eyes fell upon the ruined canvas, and a single tear traced a silent path down her cheek. Colonel Battersby stomped his boot on the polished floor. "We must have answers. This is a house of ordered tradition. No one leaves the grounds until the culprit is found." Constable Rowley fidgeted. "I shall need statements from everyone. No one is above suspicion." Outside, the rain eased, the clouds parting just enough to let a shaft of morning light spill into the gallery, catching the golden frame in a wan, trembling glow. In that uncertain light, the portrait's mutilation looked almost theatrical, an act of vengeance as much as art. Unbeknownst to the gathering, a telegram was already winging its way to a certain Belgian detective, famed on both sides of the channel for his keen understanding of the human heart and the secrets it could harbor. For at Ainswick Hall, the stage was set for a mystery that would test the very limits of Hercule Poirot's little gray cells. Chapter 2. The first clues, a pall of uncertainty, hung over Ainswick Hall as dawn crept across the sodden lawns, tinting the world in shades of dull gray. The household gathered for breakfast, but the clatter of crockery could not dispel the nervous hush that had settled in the wake of the portrait's desecration. No one seemed able to meet another's eye for long. Lady Marshwood barely touched her tea. Rupert, his usual wit dulled, stared intently at a folded newspaper, though his eyes seldom moved along the page. Constable Rowley had wasted no time in beginning his investigation. As soon as the first light filtered through the gallery's windows, he entered the room with a brisk professionalism, notebook in hand. He circled the ruin, noting every detail with a care he hoped would mask his anxiety. The slashed canvas still sat in its grand frame, a grotesque reminder of the night's crime. He knelt, peering at the torn fabric, searching for anything out of place. On the floor beneath the frame, he discovered a small, pearl button streaked faintly with red paint. Rowley bagged it as evidence, his mind whirring with the possibilities who among the household owned clothing adorned with such buttons. Miss Beatrice Rowland, already present in the gallery, had taken to examining the mutilated portrait with almost scholarly fascination. "A surgical cut," she murmured, her finger tracing the edge of the canvas. No tremor, no hesitation. Whoever did this had skill, perhaps even training. "And the paint, see here?" She indicated a smear on the frame. "Not blood. It's as though someone wanted us to believe it was." Edward Lang stood near the doorway, arms folded, shoulders tense. It's all very strange. The doors to the gallery were locked last night, weren't they? His gaze darted to Sophie, who sat quietly on the chaise, hands clasped in her lap. Sophie looked up, her voice barely audible. I checked on Mother before bed. Her key was on her dressing table the whole time. She paused. Rupert, you still have your key, don't you? Rupert hesitated, then nodded. Of course. I always keep it in my room. But even as he spoke, a shadow of doubt crossed his face. Mrs. Prentice, summoned by Constable Rowley, arrived at the gallery in her usual crisp apron, though her hands shook as she wrung her handkerchief. No one but Lady Marshwood, Mr. Rupert, and myself have access to the keys, sir. The gallery's always kept locked at night. Who last saw the portrait intact? Rowley inquired, pencil poised. Lady Marshwood's voice wavered. I passed through round 10 o'clock. Everything was normal then. Her gaze lingered on the ruined painting, eyes brimming with something more than grief, a secret pain. Perhaps. Miss Rowland straightened. The vandal took great care to remove only Lady Evelyn's face and hands. Why just those features? And where are they now? The question hung in the air. Rupert shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's gaze. If this was a message, what is it meant to say? He wondered aloud. Rowley turned to Lucien Foster, the family's solicitor, who lingered at the edge of the gathering. Any motive beyond insurance, Mr. Foster? Any reason someone might target the Marshwoods in this way? Foster adjusted his glasses. The portrait is more valuable to the family than to any collector. There were old rumors something about Lady Evelyn's history, but nothing I ever took seriously. Still, destruction on this scale feels deeply personal. The constable snapped his notebook shut. I'll need statements from everyone about last night's whereabouts. No detail is too minor, and I'll want the guest list everyone who was near the gallery and anyone who might have entered unseen. Outside, the rain eased, but the fog pressed close to the windows, muting the world beyond. The first clues button, paint, missing canvas were gathered, yet a sense of something deeper pulsed beneath the surface. A puzzle had been set, waiting for a mind sharp enough to see its shape and its solution. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. As the morning advanced, Constable Rowley, firm in his resolve, summoned every person residing at Ainswick Hall to the drawing room. The air was thick with anticipation and nerves, the faded grandeur of the chamber offering little comfort to those now cast, for the moment, in the unflattering role of suspects. Lady Marshwood sat at the head of the table, pale and regal, her composure tested by the strain of the ordeal. Beside her, Rupert's restless energy was barely contained. He tapped his foot, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the polished mahogany surface. Sophie, her face drawn, avoided looking at the damaged portrait now lying shrouded in the adjacent gallery. The housekeeper, Mrs. Prentice, perched on the edge of a chair, clutching her handkerchief as if it alone kept her from unraveling entirely. The guests assembled one by one. Miss Beatrice Rowland, art historian, entered with measured steps, eyes alert and searching, a notebook clasped to her chest. Edward Lang, with the distracted air of a man more used to theaters than police inquiries, offered a tight-lipped smile to the room, his gaze flicking from face to face, trying to gauge who appeared most unsettled. Colonel Battersby, bristling with indignation, settled heavily into a chair and crossed his arms. In my day, such a thing would never have been tolerated, he grumbled, eyes narrowed at Rupert as if the young man's untamed nature were somehow responsible for the night's calamity. The family solicitor, Lucian Foster, maintained a discreet distance from the Marshwoods, his manner polite, but guarded. Constable Rowley cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming promptly. I must remind you that no one may leave the estate until this matter is resolved." He glanced at each face, measuring their reactions. "Now, I will ask you to state your whereabouts during the night and anything unusual you might have seen or heard." Lady Marshwood answered first, her voice steady, though her hands twisted the edge of her handkerchief. "After dinner, I retired early. I passed through the gallery at 10. As I said before, I saw nothing amiss. I did not leave my room after." Rupert spoke next, sounding defensive. "I was in the library, reading, until after midnight. I didn't hear anything, certainly not someone destroying a painting. Sophie's answer was barely above a whisper. I went up to bed soon after Mother. I didn't sleep well. I thought I heard footsteps on the landing, but I assumed it was one of the staff." Mrs. Prentice straightened, her apron crisp. "I locked up after the family went to bed and checked the gallery doors myself. I spent the night in my own quarters, as usual." Edward Lang offered a nervous laugh. "I returned to my room after a short walk in the garden. Couldn't sleep too much London in my blood. I didn't see or hear anything. My window looks out over the rose beds, not the gallery." Miss Rowland, ever analytical, replied, "I stayed up late, reviewing my notes in the study. At 11:30, I heard voices soft, indistinct. Could have been the wind, but I thought perhaps someone was outside." Colonel Battersby grunted. "I retired after brandy in the lounge. Heard nothing, saw nothing. This is the most unpleasant business." Foster spoke last. "I went to my room just before midnight. I read for a while. I saw a light in the hallway sometime after, but I paid it no mind." Rowley wrote everything down, his mind already sorting through the subtle inconsistencies and forgotten details. As he finished, he looked at the group. "Until this is settled, everyone must remain available for further questions. The truth," he declared, "will come to light." Across the drawing room, a silence fell, heavy with suspicion. In the corner, the clock ticked steadily, counting down the hours until secret sold and new would finally be revealed. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives just after midday. The arrival of a motor car disturbed the strained quiet at Ainswick Hall. The vehicle was immaculate, black and gleaming even beneath the sullen sky. From it emerged a man as meticulously arranged as his attire, a gray suit pressed to perfection, an impossibly neat mustache, and an air of tranquil confidence that seemed impervious to the morning's anxieties. Hercule Poirot had come. Constable Rowley, who had been conferring with Mrs. Prentice by the front doors, straightened at once. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, voice tinged with awe and relief. That is, Lady Marshwood requested your assistance. This case, I fear, is beyond our usual village troubles." Poirot smiled with gentle courtesy. "Merci, monsieur. I am always happy to assist where the art of crime has grown sophisticated." His gaze wandered over the imposing Fouade, already assessing details. He was led through the echoing corridors, his sharp eyes absorbing every nuance: the polished floors, the hush, the faint scent of linseed and old books that clung to the air. The household gathered in the drawing room once more. Poirot entered, nodding to each member in turn. Lady Marshwood, despite her distress, managed a gracious welcome. "Monsieur Poirot, it is a great comfort to have you here." Poirot bowed. "Madam, I hope to bring clarity where there is confusion. Now, if you would indulge me, I would like to view the scene of the crime." Constable Rowley led Poirot into the gallery, the family trailing behind in tense silence. Poirot paused before the mutilated portrait, folding his hands. He examined the cuts, the frame, and the faint smear of red paint on the gilt. Then he stooped to inspect the floor, noticing the pearl button and the careful absence of dust where a foot might have disturbed it. He asked for the key to the gallery, inspecting it with a frown before returning it to Rowley. "It is always the details, monsieur, that betray us. The buttons, the paint, the absence rather than the presence of footprints, these are the small things that will reveal much." Poirot turned to the assembled suspects, fixing each with a gentle but unyielding gaze. He watched their reactions: Sophie's downcast eyes, Rupert's restless stance, the nervous way Edward Lang adjusted his cuff, the unreadable coolness of Miss Rowland. "The destruction of a portrait is not merely vandalism," Poirot mused. "It is an attack on identity. It is meant to erase, to send a message or to conceal one." Lady Marshwood's face blanched at his words. Rupert spoke, defiant but uncertain. "You think this is personal, not theft?" Poirot inclined his head. "I think, monsieur, that nothing is so simple as it appears. The theft is only a shadow. The real crime, that lies deeper." Poirot requested to review the statements already collected, and asked each person a single question about their movements, his inquiries almost casual, but unerringly precise. He lingered over inconsistencies, noting a subtle hesitation, an unwelcome flicker in Sophie's eyes, and a faint tremor in Mrs. Prentice's voice. Before departing the gallery, Poirot paused by the ruined portrait and traced the edge of the cut with a gloved finger. "You see, messieurs et mesdames, the art of detection is to find the pattern beneath the chaos. And already the pattern here begins to form." As Poirot left to review his notes, a new sense of unease settled over the house. The great detective's presence had changed everything. Secrets once safely buried now felt perilously close to the surface. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Poirot's reputation preceded him, and as the sun crept higher, every member of the household waited with tense anticipation to be called for their interview. Poirot set himself up in the library, a sanctuary of quiet lined with ancient tomes insisting that each suspect arrive alone. His presence was both calming and unnerving, every gesture purposeful, every question pointed. First came Lady Marshwood, her poise dignified, but her hands betraying a faint tremor. Poirot welcomed her with warm courtesy and motioned for her to sit. "Madam, I am most sorry for your distress. I must ask, did you notice anything unusual the evening before the crime?" She hesitated, choosing her words with care, only that Rupert was out of sorts, and Sophie seemed restless. "I was tired myself, so I retired early. I heard nothing." Poirot's eyes softened. "Merci, madam. Memory sometimes plays tricks, but even the smallest detail can illuminate the truth." Rupert entered next, attempting bravado. "You don't really suspect family, do you, Poirot?" Surely this was some outsider. Poirot raised a brow. "No one is above suspicion, monsieur. Where were you at midnight?" Rupert hesitated. "In the library, reading. I might have dozed off. When I awoke, it was well past 1. My door was closed, and I heard nothing." Poirot scribbled a note, then dismissed Rupert with a gentle nod. Next came Sophie, pale and quiet, her voice barely carrying. "I had trouble sleeping. I heard something, perhaps footsteps, but I thought it must be the wind or Mrs. Prentice." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you leave your room?" She shook her head, gaze fixed on her hands. "No, I stayed in bed. I was frightened, though I cannot say why." Edward Lang sauntered in, affecting nonchalance. "A storm, a country house, a mystery sounds like something from one of my plays, doesn't it? But I assure you, I was in my room by 11. I read, then eventually fell asleep. If someone crept about, they did so quietly." Poirot's eyes lingered on Lang's restless hands, then turned his attention to Miss Rowland. She answered with quiet authority. "I was in the study with my notes. I thought I heard voices outside, perhaps from the garden. It was late, nearly midnight. I looked, but saw nothing. Mrs. Prentice was last. Her nerves were evident, but she answered precisely. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and retired. I heard nothing out of the ordinary. This house is full of creaks at night." Poirot thanked each in turn, never pressing, yet his mind turned over every inflection and omission. When the interviews ended, he spent several minutes in silence, staring at the notes laid before him. Patterns began to emerge. A restless household. Subtle contradictions, and too many claims of having seen or heard nothing at all. Poirot sensed the real story lay buried under caution and fear, but already a faint outline of the truth was beginning to take shape if only he could fit the right pieces together. Chapter 6. First false lead. No sooner had Poirot finished his initial interviews than Constable Rowley entered the library, his face flushed with excitement. In his hand, he clutched the pearl button found beneath the ruined portrait. "Monsieur Poirot, I believe I've found our culpritor at least. Their clothing," he announced, holding up a pale blue dressing gown adorned with identical buttons. The dressing gown belonged to Sophie Marshwood. The resemblance between the button and those lining her robe was undeniable. One was indeed missing, its absence obvious upon inspection. Sophie, summoned once more to the drawing room, appeared stunned and pale, her words faltering as the evidence was displayed. I have no idea how it came off," she stammered. "I wore it last night, but I never went near the gallery. I swear." Constable Rowley was unrelenting. "You admit you were restless. You said to yourself you thought you heard footsteps. Perhaps you were walking the corridors and Poirot intervened, lifting a hand. Let us not rush, monsieur. Evidence may point, but motive must lead. He turned to Sophie, voice gentle. Mademoiselle, is there anyone who might have borrowed your dressing gown, or who might have taken the button? Sophie shook her head, tears welling. No one. I don't lend my things. I only left my room to fetch a book from the landing. Nothing more. Rupert spoke up, frustration etched on his face. This is ridiculous. Sophie wouldn't harm a fly, let alone our family's history. Lady Marshwood, equally appalled, insisted, my daughter is innocent. Someone is trying to frame her. Poirot regarded the group thoughtfully, his gaze lingering on each person's reaction. Miss Rowland leaned forward, eyes narrowed in concentration, while Edward Lang looked away, chewing his lower lip. Mrs. Prentice clutched her apron tighter than ever. Constable Rowley pressed on. The fact remains a button from Sophie's gown was found at the scene. She admits to being up. It seems clear. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. It is never so simple. This button so conveniently found, so obviously linked almost to perfect, is it not? He addressed the room. In cases of true guilt, the evidence is rarely so accommodating. More often, it is subtle, accidental, buried beneath 100 other truths. Despite his calm logic, the air in the room thickened with suspicion. Sophie's protests rang out, but uncertainty clouded every face. The family solicitor, Foster, spoke quietly. Perhaps we are too eager to resolve this, Constable. The circumstances, they do not add up. Poirot gave a small, approving nod. Indeed. I ask you all, once more, to think carefully. Anything, no matter how small, may prove essential. Constable Rowley reluctantly agreed to pause his accusations, but the damage was done. Sophie's reputation and the household's fragile trust had been rattled, and somewhere Poirot was certain the real culprit watched, measuring reactions, deciding their next move. As dusk began to fall, Poirot walked alone in the gallery, considering the ease with which the evidence had presented itself. Too easy, he thought. Far too easy. Chapter 7, the psychological game, the suspicions swirling around Sophie, set the tone for the evening. Dinner was a tense affair, with polite conversation barely masking the undercurrent of mistrust. Poirot, ever watchful, used the meal to observe more than he spoke, letting the strains and silences between the guests reveal as much as their words. Afterwards, Poirot invited the key suspects Rupert, Edward Lang, Miss Rowland, and Mrs. Prentice back to the drawing-room under the pretense of casual conversation. As the fire crackled, he began what seemed to be a meandering discussion about art, family legacy, and the value of memory. He started with Rupert, posing a question about the Marshwood heritage. Monsieur, how do you feel about the family's legacy? This house, these portraits? Rupert's answer was quick but defensive. We all feel the weight. But that painting Lady Ameline, she's more myth than history to me. Poirot gave a small nod, turning to Edward. And you, monsieur? You are an artist in your own right. Nest's pause? Edward shifted in his chair, uneasy. I prefer plays to paintings. Family portraits are just ghosts on canvas. They watch you, judge you, but they don't speak. Miss Rowland interjected, Art always speaks if you know how to listen. Sometimes what's hidden says more than what's displayed. Poirot smiled at this, watching her closely. Indeed. And sometimes the destruction of a portrait is not about hate, but about silencing a voice too loud to bear. Mrs. Prentice, clutching her handkerchief, broke her silence. It's just a painting. Why would anyone care so much? Poirot's gaze lingered on her, gentle but probing. Madam, sometimes paintings hold memories we wish to erase or truths we wish to hide. As the firelight flickered, Poirot began laying his subtle traps. He recounted, in an offhand way, a story of a forgery uncovered in Paris, mentioning how a single overlooked detailer brushstroke, a hidden mark, had revealed the truth. Miss Rowland's expression tightened at this, and she glanced, almost involuntarily, toward the gallery doors. Poirot noted the reaction. Rupert seemed bored, while Edward grew more fidgety, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. Mrs. Prentice avoided Poirot's eyes altogether. He changed tack, recalling a case where a family secret had festered for years, only to explode in a moment of violence. The room grew still. Poirot's words, delivered in a tone of gentle reminiscence, unsettled more than accusations ever could. When the conversation ended, Rupert was the first to leave, followed by Edward, shoulders tense. Miss Rowland lingered, as if hoping to ask something, but thought better of it. Mrs. Prentice slipped away quietly, head bowed. Alone once more, Poirot reflected on the evening. Small cracks had appeared, flickers of guilt, flashes of fear, or perhaps regret. Someone, he knew, was on the verge of breaking. The real test would be to see who made the next move. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The morning brought no relief to the tension that haunted Ainswick Hall. As clouds pressed low and rain tapped steadily at the window panes, the household awoke to another shock. Mrs. Prentice's anxious voice rang through the hallways. The safe in Lady Marshwood's study. It's been tampered with. Poirot was summoned at once. In the small, wood-paneled study, the safe stood ajar, its door scratched, and the lock forced. Papers were scattered on the floor. Lady Marshwood hovered near the desk, wringing her hands, her composure threatening to unravel. Rupert and Sophie, summoned by the commotion, lingered at the threshold, their faces drawn with worry. Poirot surveyed the scene methodically. Was anything taken, madam? He asked. Lady Marshwood struggled to answer. A letter, I think one I received years ago, and a small silver box. Nothing of great value. The rest untouched. Rupert bent to pick up the fallen papers. Why break in just for an old letter? He wondered aloud. And what was in the box? Mother! Lady Marshwood hesitated, color rising in her cheeks. A trinket from Evelyn herself. It had no value to anyone but me. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of guilt, or was it fear? In Lady Marshwood's glance, he asked Mrs. Prentice, who had access to the study keys. Only Lady Marshwood, myself, and Mr. Foster, the solicitor, Mrs. Prentice replied, voice trembling. Poirot called for Foster, who arrived looking uneasy. I have not entered the studies since yesterday afternoon, Foster stated. My own key remains in my desk. Poirot checked the lock and found it bore no fingerprints, only smudges. The culprit wore gloves. This was not a hurried act. They knew precisely what they wanted. Miss Rowland, lingering in the doorway, watched the proceedings keenly. Poirot beckoned her inside. "Mademoiselle, did you observe anything last night?" She shook her head. "Only that the hallway was dark. I passed by just before midnight. Nothing seemed amiss. But," she added, "I did hear someone whispering near the study. I assumed it was family." Edward Lang entered then, looking rumpled and concerned. "What's happened?" When told, he frowned. "A letter and a box? Not the sort of loot a thief usually wants." Poirot surveyed the anxious faces around him. Two crimes, so close together. Both precise, both targeting memories. First a portrait, now a letter and a keepsake. This is not random theft. He addressed the room, voice calm but commanding. The person behind these acts seeks to erase something, perhaps a truth that must remain hidden. These are the actions of desperation. Outside, thunder rolled again. Within the study, fear thickened. The sense of an unseen hand at work unsettled all. As Poirot closed the safe, he realized the stakes had risen, the thief was growing bolder, and the true mystery of Ainswick Hall was only deepening. Chapter 9, Hidden Connections. As the day wore on, Poirot retreated to the library, his mind churning through details, searching for the threads that would bind this tangled web. The crimes were too deliberate to be the work of a mere opportunist. Someone with knowledge, motive, and access was orchestrating these events. The question was why? Poirot summoned the suspects again, this time for a private round of questioning. He began with Miss Rowland, whose keen interest in the portrait's mutilation had never wavered. "Mademoiselle, you have studied art restoration. Tell me, have you ever encountered a portrait defaced in such a manner before?" She pursed her lips, thoughtful. "Only once. It was in Vienna. An aristocrat slashed the face from his wife's portrait after a scandal. He wished her memory was gone, even from paint." She paused, studying Poirot. Destruction can be an act of rage or of fear. Poirot's eyes shone. Just so. You see, the mind of a criminal is not always guided by profit, but by the need to erase a part of life itself. He made a note, then asked, "Did Lady Evelyn have any secrets that might lead someone to such lengths?" Rowland hesitated. "Only rumors. Some say she had a child before marriage, one given away. I never found evidence. But if true, such a secret could ruin reputations, even today." Next, Poirot called upon Rupert. He found the young man in the billiard room, practicing his shot with uncharacteristic intensity. "Rupert, did you know of any quarrels between your mother and Lady Evelyn? Or any conflicts within the family?" Rupert paused, cue poised. "There were whispers about Evelyn and the Marshwood inheritance, especially after my grandfather died. Some said the wrong person inherited the estate, but Mother never spoke of it. As for quarrels, family gatherings are never without a few, but nothing criminal." Poirot nodded, absorbing the subtext, the possibility of a contested will, a question of legitimacy, perhaps even a hidden rivalry. When he met with Foster, the solicitor, Poirot was more direct. "Monsieur Foster, you control the family documents. Was there ever a dispute over Lady Evelyn's will?" Foster's composure faltered. "There were inquiries, yes, Someone once questioned the authenticity of a letter naming Lady Marshwood sole heiress, but it was settled years ago. Nothing came of it. Poirot pressed on. And who made these inquiries? Foster hesitated, then answered, Edward Lang. He believed his side of the family was overlooked. He never let it go, though publicly he acts indifferent. Edward, when called, denied any obsession. I asked out of curiosity. If I'd thought there was real fraud, I'd have pursued it. The truth is, I didn't much care for Evelyn or her secrets. Poirot's interviews revealed that Lady Marshwood, Rupert, and Foster each had access to both the gallery and the study. Motive, opportunity, and family secrets were distributed among them. Meanwhile, Mrs. Prentice revealed that she once found Lady Evelyn weeping in the gallery at midnight. Long ago. She was holding a letter, sir. When she saw me, she hid it away and begged me never to speak of it. Finally, Poirot called Sophie, who had been withdrawn since suspicion first shadowed her. Sophie, you knew Lady Evelyn best. Did she ever confide in you? Sophie nodded, tears trembling on her lashes. She told me she felt haunted by a mistake in her past. She never said more. I think she was afraid it would come to light. Poirot listened, the pieces shifting in his mind. Old wounds, hidden heirs, a contested fortune, these were motives deep enough to spark fear, anger, or both. Poirot saw the connections forming, the defaced portrait, the stolen letter, the whispered secrets. It was a tapestry of longing, envy, and desperation. As twilight approached, Poirot paced the library, piecing together timelines, motives, and opportunities. One thing was clear. The crime was no longer just about art. It was about memory, about who belonged in the Marshwood legacy and who did not. The answer, he knew, lay buried beneath these tangled connections, waiting for him to unearth it. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue with the revelations of the day swirling in his mind. Poirot withdrew to his modest guest quarters, a candle flickering on the writing desk beside a pile of notes. He sorted every detail statements, timelines, gestures, silences into mental compartments, searching for the anomaly that would give him leverage over the tangled narrative. The wind rattled the window, and the house creaked as if it too were unsettled, restless with secrets not yet told. Poirot's eyes lingered on the pearl button, now in an evidence envelope. It was too convenient, too obviously linked to Sophie. Poirot turned the envelope over and over, considering, why would a clever culprit risk planting such an obvious clue, unless their intent was misdirection? He returned the button to the table and studied a photograph of the mutilated portrait, its gaping holes a silent accusation. The cuts were surgical, the paint deliberately smeared. He found himself tracing the edge of the frame, mentally reconstructing the criminal's movements. Something was amiss not with what had been left behind, but what was absent? He called for Mrs. Prentice, requesting the keys used in the house. When she arrived, she brought a set for each important room, neatly labeled. Poirot examined the gallery key closely, then compared it to the study key. Both were identical in shape and size, yet the gallery key showed faint, fresh scratches near the teeth recent tampering. The study key, in contrast, was pristine. Poirot thanked Mrs. Prentice, who looked anxious. Monsieur Poirot, is there something wrong? Poirot smiled kindly. Nothing, madam, except the truth hides in the smallest imperfections. Left alone, Poirot returned to the study and tested both keys. The gallery lock, he found, stuck slightly, as if something had been jammed in it. He shone a light inside the keyhole and glimpsed a speck of red paint, a near-invisible smear matching the same hue on the ruined frame. Poirot's mind clicked. Whoever had destroyed the portrait had done so after smearing paint on their hands, then attempted to clean up. But the evidence lingered in the lock's teeth. That detail so slight, so easily missed, was the secret clue Poirot needed. He now understood that the vandal was not simply seeking to erase Lady Evelyn, but was careful, methodical, even desperate not to be identified. The question remained: who in the house was meticulous enough to plan misdirection, plant a button, and still make a crucial error? Poirot remembered Miss Rowland's nervous glance when art forgeries were discussed. The faint tremor in Foster's hand as inheritance was mentioned, and Lady Marshwood's barely veiled distress at the mention of Evelyn's letter. He also remembered Sophie's innocence, too vulnerable to concoct such layered deceit. The circle of suspicion narrowed. Poirot tucked the gallery key and the paint sample away. He penned a letter to himself, an old habit for clarifying his thoughts, summarizing the night's timeline, the missing heir theory, and the possibility of a deliberate frame-up. Each new piece fitted the theory. Someone who feared exposure, who wished to erase a connection to Lady Evelyn, yet underestimated Poirot's devotion to minutiae. As the candle guttered low, Poirot resolved to keep this clue to himself. He needed one more act from the culprit, a slip of tongue, a desperate move before he could lay the whole pattern bare. For now, he would watch, wait, and let the household's tensions do their work. Poirot placed the key on his nightstand and folded his hands. The trap was set. All that remained was to see who, drawn by fear or pride, would step into it. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The following morning dawned bleak and heavy, as if Ainswick Hall itself was bracing for another blow. In the breakfast room, conversation was stilted and brittle. Every glance was weighed down by suspicion. Every movement seemed charged with implication. Poirot took his tea in silence, his eyes roving the table, quietly cataloguing every flicker of unease. Rupert snapped first. "This can't go on, Mother. We're prisoners in our own house, and the longer Poirot investigates, the more we all look guilty. If you ask me, the answer is obvious. Someone is trying to make Sophie the scapegoat." Lady Marshwood shot him a look, her knuckles white around her teacup. "We will trust in Monsieur Poirot's method. Hasty accusations do no one any good." Edward Lang pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. "All I know is that secrets breed like rats in these old estates. If anyone here is hiding something, now would be the time to confess, before it's too late." Miss Rowland sat rigid, notebook abandoned beside her. A normally incisive gaze darted between faces. Perhaps, she offered carefully, the portrait and the letter were meant as warnings to someone specific, not to the family as a whole. Mrs. Prentice, hovering with the tea tray, seemed even more timid than usual. Poirot caught the tremble in her hand as she refilled his cup, and the way her eyes flitted to the clock on the mantel, watching the minutes tick by, as if she feared the arrival of noon. Midway through the meal, Foster entered with a telegram. He handed it wordlessly to Lady Marshwood, who paled as she read. It's from the London Gallery. They have heard rumors of our painting being offered on the black market. Cut into pieces. A hush fell. Poirot's mind turned. A false lead, perhaps, or a distraction. He murmured, but we must not dismiss it out of hand. Rupert slammed his fist on the table. I can't stand this. Someone here is lying, and if the police won't act, perhaps the rest of us should. In the silence that followed, alliances began to shift. Rupert and Sophie retreated to the conservatory, speaking in low, urgent whispers. Lady Marshwood and Mrs. Prentice disappeared into the study. Edward and Foster exchanged wary looks, both acutely aware of old grievances between their branches of the family. Miss Rowland withdrew to the gallery, staring for long minutes at the mutilated portrait, lost in thought. Poirot watched the splintering of the household with keen interest. It was as he had hoped. Suspicion now ran wild, turning each member against the others, drawing out hidden fears and rivalries. He caught Mrs. Prentice in the hallway, eyes red from weeping. Monsieur Poirot, I cannot bear it. The house feels cursed. Lady Evelyn's portrait always brought peace now, only pain. He offered her a handkerchief. Madam, grief makes us see ghosts. But remember, even the cleverest criminal can be tripped by their own fears. By midday, every alibi had grown ragged. The suspects began to watch each other as much as Poirot. Sophie flinched when anyone spoke her name. Rupert's anger flared at the slightest provocation. Even Lady Marshwood's composure slipped, her regal bearing cracking under the strain. Poirot, meanwhile, let the drama unfold. He had seen the effects of mounting suspicion before. It was in these moments that people made mistakes, revealed loyalties, or let slip a crucial truth. He took to the library, writing a fresh list of motives and opportunities, waiting for the chaos to reach its peak. It would not be long, he sensed, before someone made a desperate move. Chapter 12. The confrontation, a grim quiet enveloped Ainswick Hall as the hours crept by. The storm outside had abated, but inside, the tension was close and electric. Poirot observed from the shadows, sensing the household's nerves fraying. Every gesture was fraught, every conversation a veiled interrogation. It was time, Poirot decided, to force a reckoning. If the murderer would not slip, he would set the stage for the slip to happen. He summoned the key suspects to the drawing room as evening approached. Lady Marshwood, Rupert, Sophie, Edward Lang, Miss Rowland, Foster, and Mrs. Prentice. The fire snapped and spat in the grate, lending the room a feverish warmth at odds with the chill of accusation that hung over the gathering. Poirot stood with his back to the window, hands clasped before him. Mesdames et messieurs, I ask you for patience a little longer. Each of you holds a piece of this unhappy puzzle. But tonight, I will need to press you on details some of which you may prefer to forget. He fixed his gaze first on Edward Lang. Monsieur, when you walked in the garden the night of the crime, you claimed you saw no one. Yet the mud on your shoes was not from the rose beds, but from the rear terrace beneath Lady Marshwood's window. Can you explain this? Edward's jaw tightened. I wondered. Yes, I needed air, but I saw nothing of the crime. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You see, a mind like mine notices small discrepancies. But perhaps you saw someone a shadow. Perhaps? Or heard footsteps? Edward's eyes flickered, then dropped. I thought I saw someone on the stairs. It could have been Sophie. I didn't think it mattered. Sophie flushed. I never left my room. Why would you say that? Before the argument could escalate, Poirot turned to Foster. Monsieur Foster, you handled Lady Evelyn's will. There have been whispers of changes. Was anything left unrecorded? A codicil? A letter? A secret? Foster stammered. Lady Evelyn gave me a letter years ago. She asked me to keep it safe. I placed it in the study's safe, at her request. But I never read it. Lady Marshwood looked stricken. That letter was stolen last night. What did it say? Foster shook his head. I truly don't know. Poirot nodded, turning to Mrs. Prentice. Madam, you found Lady Evelyn weeping in the gallery once. Did she confide in you? Mrs. Prentice wrung her hands. Only that she feared her past would catch up with her. She said there was a truth that could ruin the family, something about a child, I think. But she begged me never to repeat it. Rupert interjected, agitation mounting. This is all madness. Who would go to these lengths, destroying a portrait, stealing letters, framing Sophie? Poirot's gaze fell on Miss Rowland. Mademoiselle, you have been the most curious about the painting's damage. You suggested before that destruction can be an act of fear. Do you know what it is that someone here fears? Miss Rowland met his gaze steadily, though her hands trembled. Fear of being forgotten, perhaps, or fear of being found out. Poirot let the words hang in the air, then addressed the group as a whole. The time for caution has passed. Whoever has orchestrated these crimes, whoever slashed the portrait, planted the button, and stole from the safe did so to erase a secret, not for gain. The evidence is there, in every contradiction and hesitation. Tonight, I ask you all, confess what you know. For tomorrow, the truth will out, with or without your help. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the crackle of the fire. Poirot watched the play of emotions, anger, fear, denial, guilt across each face. He knew the confrontation had pushed someone close to the edge. As the group broke apart, scattering into the night, Poirot caught a final, lingering glance from Lady Marshwood. Something in her eyes a plea, or perhaps a warning, told him the most dangerous moment of all was yet to come. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the house grew eerily silent after Poirot's confrontation. The usual domestic rhythms were gone, replaced by a sense of expectant dread. Shadows lengthened across the halls as dusk descended, and each member of the household retreated to their own corners, some in search of solace, others, perhaps, of escape. Poirot did not rest. He moved quietly through the hallways, listening for signs of agitation, a door closing too quickly, whispered voices behind study doors. The detective knew that the tension he had sown would push the guilty party to action. The moment when a cornered suspect attempts to destroy evidence, silence a witness, or slip away was nearly upon them. Around 10 o'clock, Poirot stationed himself near the staircase with a clear view of both the gallery and Lady Marshwood's study. The rain returned with renewed force, hammered the windows, masking the soft footsteps of someone descending the main staircase. Poirot melted into the shadows as a figure cloaked and nervous moved silently past the grandfather clock. It was Miss Rowland, her face half-lit by the flicker of her candle. She paused by the study door, glanced over her shoulder, then slipped inside. Poirot waited, counting the seconds. 5 minutes passed. The house remained still, except for the distant roll of thunder. Then came a faint scraping sound, the unmistakable snap of a lock being forced, and the rustle of papers. Poirot emerged, silent as a wraith, and entered the study. Miss Rowland was bent over the safe, her hands trembling as she rifled through the scattered documents. She started when she saw Poirot, fear flooding her face. Monsieur Poirot was only. Poirot held up a hand. No need for explanations, mademoiselle. The hour is late for secrets. What is it you hoped to find? Tears sprang to her eyes. I wanted to see if the letter was truly gone, if perhaps there was a copy. You don't understand the truth in that letter could ruin more than one life. Poirot approached gently. Then let us speak plainly. Yes? You suspected the letter concerned a child, Lady Aveline's child, possibly someone present in this very house. Miss Rowland nodded, anguish written across her features. If it's true, if the child was hidden in the family, someone here is not who they claim to be. If that comes to light, it will destroy reputations, fortunes, everything. Poirot regarded her, eyes kind but piercing. You are not the culprit, mademoiselle, but you are close to the heart of this secret. Who do you believe the child is? She shook her head. I cannot be sure, but I think Lady Marshwood knows. I think that's why she's been so agitated. Before Poirot could press further, a commotion erupted in the corridor, Rupert shouting, Sophie's panicked voice, and the hurried steps of Mrs. Prentice. Poirot hurried out, Miss Rowland close behind. In the main hall, Rupert had cornered Edward Lang, who was trying to force open a window. Where do you think you're going? Rupert demanded, voice edged with panic. You can't just run. Edward glared, defiant. I've had enough of this house, these suspicions. If I'm not free to leave, what am I? A prisoner? Poirot stepped between them. Gentlemen, please. No one leaves until this is resolved. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. Edward slumped, defeated. Easy for you to say, Poirot. Everyone here has something to lose. Sophie, shaking, clung to Rupert's arm. I just want this to end, she whispered. Poirot surveyed the group. We are nearly at the truth. Desperate acts reveal desperate hearts. Someone has risked everything to keep a secret tan tonight. They nearly succeeded in fleeing or destroying what's left. With calm assurance, Poirot turned to the others now gathered, voices hushed, eyes wide. Stay together, all of you. The next move will not be yours, but mine. In the morning, the entire story will be told. As he shepherded the group back to the drawing room, Poirot's mind worked furiously. Someone was at their breaking point. Soon, the final piece would fall into place. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The night dragged on, the air in Ainswick Hall growing heavier with every passing minute. Poirot sat alone by the fire in the drawing room, his mind racing through the final pieces of the puzzle. The faces of the suspects lingered in his thoughts, their gestures, their words, and the subtle clues that each had left behind. Each one had secrets, but one of them, perhaps more than one, was hiding the truth behind Lady Evelyn's portrait, the letter, and the tampered safe. Poirot had been patient, but now, as the clock ticked towards midnight, he knew the time for waiting had ended. He stood, stretching his legs, and took a long glance at the group gathered in the adjoining room. Their restless energy was palpable. Everyone, it seemed, was on edge. Rupert and Sophie sat together, speaking in low tones, while Mrs. Prentice hovered in the corner, her eyes darting nervously between the others. Edward Lang looked agitated, pacing near the window, while Miss Rowland sat quietly, her gaze distant and unreadable. Poirot made his way back into the center of the room, where they all waited for him to speak. His calm, deliberate presence instantly stilled the room. Mesdames et messieurs, it is time to speak plainly. I have observed each of you, your actions, your words, and now I know the truth. A sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Rupert straightened, his defiance hidden behind a mask of feigned curiosity. Edward's eyes narrowed, and Miss Rowland's fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. The tension was so thick that it felt like the very walls of Ainswick Hall might burst under the weight of it. Poirot turned his gaze on Lady Marshwood, who sat at the far end of the room, hands folded tightly in her lap. Madam, it is time to answer your own question. The portrait, the letter, the tampered safe, they were all meant to protect something, were they not? Lady Marshwood paled. Her voice was steady, though a slight tremor betrayed her inner turmoil. I've already told you everything I know. What do you think I'm hiding? Poirot's eyes softened, but his words remained firm. You are hiding the past, madam. The past that haunts you all, like a specter in this house. Lady Marshwood's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. Poirot continued, pacing the room as he spoke. You see, it is not enough to destroy a portrait, a letter, or a will. You must destroy the very memory of what they represent. And that is what someone here has done. He turned sharply, his gaze fixing on Miss Rowland. Mademoiselle, you were the first to recognize the significance of the painting's destruction. But it was not just the portrait of Lady Evelyn that you were trying to erase. It was the memory of someone else, a person whose existence threatened everything you had come to claim. Miss Rowland's expression faltered for just an instant before she composed herself. You're mistaken, she whispered. I did not. Poirot cut her off, his voice unwavering. You did, mademoiselle. You were the one who knew of the hidden child, the one who had been abandoned, the one whose existence threatened the inheritance and legacy of the Marshwood family. A child who had been hidden from public view, whose name was never spoken. You feared that the truth would come to light, and so you decided to erase it. A strangled sob escaped from Lady Marshwood's lips. No, no, it couldn't have been her. It wasn't her fault. She buried her face in her hands, unable to look at anyone in the room. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice was still resolute. The child was you, madam, Lady Evelyn's daughter, born in secret. And when Evelyn died, you were left with the terrible knowledge that you had a claim to the Marshwood inheritance, an inheritance you believed was rightfully yours, but one that would never be accepted if the truth came out. So, you decided to destroy the evidence, the painting, the letter, the key to the safe, and the child's identity. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Lady Marshwood lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes filled with both anguish and relief. Yes, she whispered. It was true. Lady Evelyn had a child, a daughter, and I was terrified. Terrified that everything I had worked for would be taken away, that my family would be reduced to nothing. Poirot's expression softened, his voice gentle. Madam, you are not the only one who has feared losing everything. There are many in this room who have been bound by secrets, by the fear of being exposed. But remember, the truth, however painful, is always the path to peace. Hiding it only ensures that the fear will follow you forever. The tension in the room finally seemed to lift, and for the first time that night, the guests exhaled as one. Sophie, who had been silent throughout the ordeal, stood and approached her mother. "I don't care about the money, Mother," she said quietly. "I only care about you. The guilt, the fear, and the long-held secret had been exposed." But for Lady Marshwood, there was a moment of clarity perhaps for the first time in her life. The truth had set her free. And for the others, there was a sense of resolution, a glimpse of hope that the tangled mess of their family's past might be untangled at last. Poirot's job was done. The truth had emerged, and with it, a new chapter for the Marshwood family. Chapter 15. The final gathering, the revelation had settled over Ainswick Hall like a thick fog. Lady Marshwood's confession, though painful, had brought a peculiar sense of relief to the household. The secrets that had bound the family together in silence for so long were now exposed, and though it felt as though the very foundation of the house might crack under the weight of the truth, there was a palpable shift in the air. Something had changed. Something had broken at last. Yet, Poirot was not one to let a case end on the note of mere confession. There was still the final piece to reveal, the true conclusion to the puzzle. The gathered suspects, now more subdued than before, sat in the drawing room, each still processing the gravity of what had just been unearthed. The fire flickered in the hearth, its warmth offering little comfort against the storm brewing inside the house. Poirot took a moment to look at the room. Lady Marshwood, sitting silently, still racked with the aftermath of her confession, was clenching her hands tightly in her lap. Rupert and Sophie, side by side, exchanged glances, neither fully able to process the weight of the truth yet. Mrs. Prentice, her eyes red, stood in the corner, quietly holding back tears. Edward Lang, his face unreadable, looked out of the window, seemingly lost in thought. Miss Rowland remained impassive, but her expression had softened, perhaps from the understanding that the family's struggle was no longer hidden in the dark. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice breaking the stillness. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have come far, but there is still one final thing to address. The truth, as I have said, is like a thread pulled through the fabric of time. But every thread must be tied off and must be woven into the whole. Only then can we understand the full pattern." He paused, ensuring every eye in the room was on him. Poirot's gaze turned toward Lady Marshwood, whose eyes remained cast downward, guilt still lingering in her posture. "Madam, you have told us of the past, But there is something that remained unsaid, something that connects the events we've witnessed to the actions of your daughter." Lady Marshwood looked up, her face pale, her breath shallow. I don't understand," she whispered. Poirot smiled gently, yet his eyes were sharp. "Lady Evelyn's secret daughter, the one you tried to protect, was not just any child. She was a part of this family, not only by blood, but by the choices that now ripple through the years. The letter that was stolen from the safe was not merely a letter of inheritance. It was a record of your guilt, a testament to the family's past misdeeds." Edward Lang stirred, the muscles of his jaw clenching. "What do you mean? Are you suggesting that my father—" Poirot raised a hand, stopping him. "I do not suggest, Monsieur Lang, I deduce. The letter contained the confession of a second child one who was not only forgotten, but erased, both physically and legally. But the letter did not only concern your family's inheritance. It detailed something far more dangerous. A marriage, a deception, and a promise made long before any of us could understand its cost." Sophie, still pale from the emotional toll of the night, turned to Poirot. "What was in that letter? Poirot, what is it that connects all of this?" Poirot's gaze shifted to her. "You, mademoiselle, are the key to it all. You see, when your mother destroyed Lady Evelyn's portrait, she did not only erase a symbol of the past. She tried to wipe away the evidence that the child the one you have all tried to forget was, in fact, Lady Evelyn's own daughter. And that daughter," Poirot continued, his voice slow, deliberate, "was not just any family member. It was the woman who stood before you as the key to the inheritance, to the future of Marshwood." Sophie's eyes widened as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. I don't understand," she whispered. Poirot's voice softened. "Madam, you kept the truth hidden for years, but it is not too late to embrace it. The letter was meant to reveal the truth, not just about Lady Evelyn, but about the one who bore her name. The one who you believed was lost." A long silence followed. The truth, so long buried, hung heavily between them all. No one spoke at first. Then Sophie, trembling, stood slowly, her eyes fixed on her mother. "It was me, wasn't it?" Lady Marshwood nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Sophie. You were the child of Lady Evelyn. I was afraid that the truth would ruin everything, that it would take away your inheritance, our place in this world." Poirot stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "And in erasing the portrait, in stealing the letter, you believed you could erase your past. But a past, madam, once revealed, cannot be erased. It can only be embraced." The room was still, the weight of the words settling over them. Finally, Edward Lang spoke, his voice tight with restraint. "So, all this time, we've been fighting over something that never belonged to us. A legacy built on lies." Poirot nodded. "Yes. But now that the truth is out, you must decide how to move forward. This family, your legacy, can only be healed if you are honest with yourselves." Lady Marshwood stood, her hands trembling. She looked at Sophie, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Sophie took a step forward, her voice gentle. We can't change the past, Mother, but we can move forward. Together. Poirot watched, satisfied that the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The truth was out, the family's history exposed in full. It was a painful truth, but it was the only way forward. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Poirot felt the weight of the case lift from his shoulders. The mystery had been solved, and Ainswick Hall, for the first time in years, was no longer held hostage by its secrets. Chapter 16. The reveal the morning after the storm of revelations. The atmosphere in Ainswick Hall was starkly different. Gone were the anxious whispers and hidden glances. The family, though still reeling from the truth, had entered a new phase of their reckoning. The truth had been exposed, the past unearthed, and now there was only the present and the weight of how they would move forward. Poirot, ever the observer, had watched the family for the past several hours, allowing them the time and space to absorb the shock. But now, the time for reflection is over. The mystery was not merely about Lady Evelyn's defaced portrait or the stolen letter. It was about the people in this room, their pasts, and their futures. A resolution, however painful, had to come. Poirot had summoned the family and the remaining key suspects to the drawing room once again. He stood by the window, watching the rain finally subside, letting the faint light bathe the room in soft hues. He could sense their nerves, their eagerness for closure. The final confession, his own truth, was yet to come. As they filed in, each with their own air of resignation, Poirot motioned them to take their seats. Lady Marshwood had regained some composure since the previous night's breakdown, but the weariness in her eyes betrayed the toll the confession had taken. Sophie sat beside her, her posture still tentative, yet there was an unmistakable strength in the way she held herself. Rupert, ever the skeptic, still looked at Poirot with wariness, though the anger that had once simmered in him seemed to have cooled. Edward Lang was seated near the fire, his usual bravado gone, his shoulders hunched as though carrying the weight of 100 unspoken words. Miss Rowland, who had been quiet since Poirot's revelations, watched him intently, her expression unreadable. Poirot, with his usual precision, took his seat at the head of the room, his gaze moving over each of them. He could feel the mounting tension, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. They all wanted answers, but more than that, they wanted to know what came next. I have spoken at length in the past, Poirot began, his voice soft but clear. The lies, the fears, the erased memories that have haunted this house. But the future, mesdames et messieurs, is the true test. The truth is now out in the open. It cannot be buried, cannot be hidden behind walls of silence. Lady Marshwood shifted in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. And now, she asked, her voice strained. What do we do now, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's gaze softened as he turned to her. Now, madam, you must choose. The truth has shattered this house's walls, but how you rebuild them is entirely in your hands. The path ahead is uncertain, but it is yours to walk. Do you remain bound by the fear that has crippled you for so long? Or do you step forward into the light, allowing the past to be a part of you, but not to define you? Sophie's voice broke the silence, her tone tentative but strong. Mother, I know it's been difficult. but we can move forward. We don't have to be trapped by the past anymore." Lady Marshwood nodded slowly, her eyes still clouded with grief. "I've spent so many years hiding, Sophie, hiding from the truth, from myself. I don't know if I can change, but I'll try." Poirot smiled, his expression warm. "That is all anyone can do, madam, to try, to embrace what they cannot change, and to work with what they can." Rupert, who had been silently observing, leaned forward. "So, we just move on from here? Forget everything that's happened?" Poirot's gaze turned sharp. "No, monsieur, we do not forget, but we learn. We learn from our mistakes, from the past shadows, and we allow those lessons to guide us. It is not a matter of forgetting, it is a matter of not allowing the past to control your future." Edward Lang spoke up next, his voice heavy with resignation. "And what of the inheritance? The fortune my family fought for, that my father believed was rightfully ours?" Poirot's eyes met Edward's. "The inheritance is but a symbol of a much larger truth, monsieur. A family, once fractured by secrets, can only truly inherit peace once they are whole. You may have the wealth, but without the unity of the family, what is it worth?" The room fell silent as Poirot's words settled in. Each person seemed to absorb his meaning, the weight of his thoughts pressing upon them. Lady Marshwood looked down, lost in thought. Sophie's hand, which had been gently resting on her mother's arm, tightened. Rupert, his expression unreadable, glanced out the window at the clearing sky. Poirot stood, signaling that the conversation was drawing to a close. "I will leave you now to reflect on what has been said. The truth is a heavy burden, but it is also a gift. You may choose to hold on to it, to let it guide you, or you may choose to reject it. But remember this: every truth, once spoken, is a key to freedom or to destruction. The choice, as always, lies with you." With that, Poirot turned to leave, his steps measured and deliberate. As he reached the door, he paused and glanced back. "One final thing," he said, his voice softer now. "The person who destroyed Lady Evelyn's portrait, the one who stole the letter and tampered with the safe, was motivated by fear, not malice. Fear of losing everything, fear of being exposed. And in the end, it was fear that led to their undoing." The family sat in stunned silence, the truth now fully exposed, the final mystery unraveled. Poirot had done his part. The rest, he knew, was up to them. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. The days that followed Poirot's final gathering were strange. Like the quiet that descends after a storm has passed, leaving behind an unsettling calm. The family of Ainswick Hall, once fractured by secrets, now stood at the precipice of a new reality. But with the truth laid bare, they were left to face the aftermath of actions taken, words spoken, and a legacy forever altered. Poirot, after a brief period of reflection, had made his exit. The case, he knew, had reached its conclusion. But as he sat in the private room at the inn, the flickering light of the candle casting long shadows on the walls, he realized that some mysteries never truly ended. They simply evolved. He had returned to Ainswick Hall one final time, but this time he did not come as the detective was seeking answers. He had come as the witness to an unfolding story, one of human frailty, redemption, and the quiet courage required to face one's darkest truths. In the drawing room, the Marshwood family gathered again, this time without the weight of secrets hovering in the background. Lady Marshwood sat by the window, her gaze focused on the horizon, while Sophie, now more at ease, spoke softly with Mrs. Prentice, who had become the quiet rock of support in the family. Rupert paced back and forth, his usual defiance tempered with an air of resignation. Edward Lang, too, seemed subdued, his posture stiff as he looked over the family documents, seemingly searching for something he could not name. The one person who remained uncertain was Miss Rowland, who, though part of the family's reckoning, still carried the weight of her own hidden truths. She had been the one most intimately tied to Lady Evelyn's past, and as the truth came to light, she found herself standing at the intersection of loyalty and justice. Would she remain by the family's side, or would she walk away from the legacy of lies? As the group gathered for one last conversation, Poirot stood quietly by the door, observing them all. He could feel their collective tension, but also the hope that had begun to seep through their words. They were no longer prisoners to their past, they were free, even if it meant facing the pain of the truth head-on. Poirot finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority and empathy. Mesdames et messieurs, the journey we have undertaken together has not been easy. But I do not need to tell you that the truth, no matter how difficult, is the only path toward redemption. You have seen what lies can do, how they can cripple a family, shatter relationships, and steal from you a future. But you have also seen what happens when you face the truth with courage. And I must commend you all, for that courage is rare. Lady Marshwood lifted her eyes to him, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. We have lost so much, Monsieur Poirot. Not just our past, but our peace. How can we ever rebuild from this? Poirot smiled gently, moving to stand before her. Madam, rebuilding begins not with what you lose, but with what you choose to keep. You may not be able to undo the past, but you have the power to shape your future. You have been given a second chance not to erase your mistakes, but to live with them, learn from them, and move forward. That is the true measure of strength. Sophie, who had been listening intently, spoke up. And what about the family's legacy, Monsieur Poirot? What will become of it now that we know the truth? Poirot's gaze shifted to the family documents on the table. The legacy, mademoiselle, is not just in the property or the wealth. It is in how you choose to live. You are the stewards of that legacy now. What you do with it will determine whether it becomes a burden or a gift. Rupert crossed his arms, his usual skepticism apparent. And what of the inheritance? What happens to fortune? To our future? Poirot's expression grew more serious. That, monsieur, is a matter that must be settled in time. The inheritance, while important, is not the true measure of your future. What matters now is the unity you forge in the wake of these revelations. You must decide together what your family's future will look like, whether it will be defined by the shadows of the past or the promise of a new beginning. Edward Lang, who had been quiet for some time, spoke with unexpected clarity. And what of Lady Evelyn's legacy? Will the truth ever be fully accepted by the world? Poirot's eyes softened. The world may never fully understand, monsieur, but the truth, once revealed, will always have a way of finding its place. It may not be celebrated, but it will be acknowledged, and that is enough. Miss Rowland, who had remained on the periphery of the conversation, finally spoke. I don't know where I fit into all of this anymore, she admitted quietly. I came here searching for answers, for closure. But I see now that the answers I sought were not the ones I expected. Poirot looked at her with understanding. Mademoiselle, sometimes the search for answers leads us to places we are not prepared to go. But you have found what you needed, even if it was not what you anticipated. The truth, like the past, cannot be changed. But you can choose how to carry it with you moving forward. The room was silent for a long moment as the family processed Poirot's words. Each of them had come to terms with their own part in the story. Lady Marshwood with her guilt, Sophie with her newfound strength, Rupert with his bitterness, Edward with his pride, and Miss Rowland with her quiet realization. Poirot stepped toward the door. His work done. I must take my leave now. The mystery has been solved, but the work of reconciliation is yours to undertake. Remember, a family is only as strong as the bonds it chooses to keep. As he left the room, the sound of footsteps behind him told him that they were ready to begin again. The future, uncertain as it was, lay before them, but for the first time in years, it was theirs to shape. Chapter 18, the closing remark. The final days at Ainswick Hall were filled with an air of quiet reflection. The storm had passed, but its effects lingered shadows in the corners of the old estate, where secrets once flourished unchecked. But now, in the wake of the truth's revelation, there was a palpable shift, an uneasy peace settling over the Marshwood family. They had been given a chance at redemption, but what they did with it was still unknown. The puzzle had been solved, the past unearthed, and yet, as Poirot prepared to leave, he understood that the true resolution lay in how each of them would face the future. The family had come together in the drawing room one last time, the fire crackling as though offering its own quiet reassurance. Poirot stood before them, a figure of calm amidst the lingering tension, his every word chosen with the same care as his deductions. He had been an observer, a catalyst for truth, but now it was time for him to leave them to their own reckoning. Lady Marshwood was the first to speak, her voice steady but weary. Monsieur Poirot, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done, for all that you've uncovered. You've given us a chance to rebuild, to face the truths we've spent so long avoiding. But what happens now? Poirot smiled softly, but his eyes were piercing as ever. Madam, I have only guided you to the truth. What you do with it, how you carry it, is entirely yours. The past is a heavy weight, but it is also a compass, one that can guide you toward a new beginning. Sophie, who had grown stronger with each passing day, glanced at her mother, her gaze unwavering. I don't think we can change everything, Mother. We can't undo the years of secrets or the damage they caused, but we can move forward. Together, Lady Marshwood looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, hope, perhaps, or the first flicker of release. I never wanted to drag you into this, Sophie. I thought I could protect you from the truth, but I see now that it was the truth that needed to be faced." Poirot nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "The truth is rarely kind, madam. It is often cruel and unforgiving, but it is also liberating. The shackles of guilt, shame, and fear can only be broken by the courage to face them. You have taken the first step. The rest, as I said, is yours to decide." Rupert, still uneasy, but calmer than before, spoke up. "What about the inheritance, Poirot? The legacy of the family, what does it mean now? We've all been living in the shadow of something that doesn't even belong to us." Poirot turned to face him, his expression softening. "Monsieur, the inheritance is not just in the land or the wealth. It is in the values you choose to hold dear. It is in the bonds you forge, in the way you rebuild what was broken. The true legacy of the Marshwood family is not found in old portraits or dusty documents, but in the way you choose to honor the future." Edward Lang, who had been unusually quiet, spoke with a tone of resolve. "So we move on. No more fighting over what doesn't matter. We will rebuild what's left." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting between the family members, noting the shift in their demeanor, the subtle signs that they were beginning to understand. "Indeed, monsieur, you rebuild not for the inheritance, but for yourselves. The legacy you choose to leave behind will be determined by the way you live, the choices you make today." Miss Rowland, her gaze still thoughtful, finally broke her silence. "And what about me, Poirot? Where do I fit into all of this? I came here seeking answers, but now I'm not sure what to do with them." Poirot's eyes softened, and he took a step toward her. "Mademoiselle, sometimes the answers we seek are not the ones we expect, but you have found something far more important: peace with yourself. You are no longer bound by the past. You can now choose your own path, free from the shadows that once haunted you." Miss Rowland seemed to absorb his words, her shoulders relaxing as she looked toward the future for the first time in years. There was no immediate sense of resolution, but Poirot knew that the seed of change had been planted. She would find her way, as would they all. Poirot turned to leave, but before he could step toward the door, Lady Marshwood spoke again. "Monsieur Poirot, I can't thank you enough. I don't know what will become of us, but I promise you, we will try to live with the truth. We will try to be better." Poirot turned back to face them, his smile gentle but knowing. "You have already begun, madam. The rest, as I said, is up to you." With a final nod, Poirot turned and left the room, leaving the Marshwoods to their newfound peace. He knew they would never be the same, and that was as it should be. The truth had a way of transforming people, of shaping them into something new. As Poirot made his way to the door, the rain had finally stopped. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky, a perfect metaphor for what lay ahead. The Marshwoods had been given a chance to begin again, to rebuild their future on the foundation of truth and understanding. It was a rare gift, one that Poirot knew would not be wasted. He paused at the door, glancing back at the house one last time. For all its secrets and sorrow, Ainswick Hall was now a place of hope. The truth had been revealed, the story had been told, and now For the first time in years, the future was theirs to shape. Chapter 19. The quiet aftermath. The days following Poirot's departure from Ainswick Hall were quieter than the family had ever known. The house, which had once echoed with whispered secrets and unspoken fears, now stood as a solemn witness to the difficult truths that had been brought to light. The heavy burden of guilt had been lifted, though the process of healing was slow, like the slow erosion of the cliffs that bordered the estate. The family, each in their own way, was left to come to terms with what had been revealed and what had been lost. Lady Marshwood, though still grieving, seemed more at peace than she had in years. The constant weight of fear and shame had lifted from her shoulders, replaced with the daunting task of rebuilding her life. She had already begun to make amends, reaching out to distant relatives and old acquaintances, attempting to reforge the connections that had been severed by decades of lies. Sophie, too, had begun to change. The young woman who had once been sheltered and unsure now carried herself with a quiet strength. She had taken on more responsibilities around the estate, managing the household with a level of maturity that surprised even her mother. Yet, despite her newfound confidence, there was still a quiet sadness in her eyes, as though the weight of the family's past was a shadow that would always linger just beyond her reach. Rupert, ever the skeptic, was the hardest to read. Though he had shown a certain amount of acceptance in the aftermath of Poirot's investigation, he had yet to fully embrace the idea of moving forward. He spent his days either alone in the library or in the estate's private garden, and there were moments when his frustration boiled over, spilling into terse conversations with his sister or heated arguments with his mother. Yet, in the quiet moments, when no one was looking, it was clear that he, too, was grappling with the weight of the truth. Edward Lang had, perhaps, the most difficult time of all. His pride had been wounded by the revelations of the past, and though he had not voiced his grievances openly, his actions spoke volumes. He spent his days walking the grounds, often in solitude, seemingly searching for something he could not name. The inheritance, the family's legacy, had always been tied to his identity, yet now that it had been exposed as built on secrets, he was left without a clear path forward. His connections to the Marshwood family had been forged in ambition, and now, with the truth known, he was uncertain where his future lay. Miss Rowland, too, had been left to find her own place in the new reality of Ainswick Hall. The revelations had shaken her to her core, not only because of her connection to Lady Evelyn's hidden daughter, but because she realized how deeply the family had been tied to the secrets she had once hoped to uncover. The distance she had maintained between herself and the Marshwoods now seemed less a protective barrier and more a defense against her own complicity in the family's tangled web. Yet, in the aftermath, she found herself drawn closer to the family, particularly to Sophie. The two women, once strangers to one another, now shared an unspoken understanding, bound together by the weight of their shared history. Poirot's absence was felt in the hall, though not in the way one might expect. The detective had come, uncovered the hidden truths, and left, but the real work, the slow, painful process of healing, had only just begun. His part in the mystery had been decisive, but the family's future would depend on their ability to learn from the past and embrace the truth, no matter how painful. One afternoon, as the sun began to set over the estate, Lady Marshwood sat in the drawing room, looking out over the garden. The air was warm, and the flowers that had bloomed during the tumult of the past few weeks seemed to radiate life and color. For the first time in years, she felt as though she could breathe freely. The house was not perfected, would never be, but it was hers, and it could be rebuilt. Sophie entered quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at her mother, her face soft with understanding. "Mother, I've been thinking," Sophie began, her voice steady. "I know this isn't going to be easy, but I want to make sure we take care of Ainswick Hall. I want to honor the family, and I want to do it right." Lady Marshwood turned to her daughter, a faint smile touching her lips. "You've grown, Sophie. I see it in you. You have the strength I never gave you credit for." Sophie shook her head, her expression earnest. "I had to grow. We all had to. But I think we can make this work. We can move on. Together." There was a moment of silence, a rare moment of peace. The two women sat together, the weight of their shared history finally settling into a place where it could no longer destroy them. The house, too, seemed to stand a little taller in that moment, its history now woven into the fabric of their future, not as a burden, but as a foundation. Across the hall, Rupert sat in the library, his fingers tracing the spines of books, his mind distant. He was unsure, as always, of where he fit in the new order of things. Yet, despite his lingering frustration, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. The walls he had built up round himself, his anger, his disillusionment began to show signs of cracking. He had been part of this family for so long, and he realized that, despite everything, he still cared for it. He still wanted something to hold on to. Edward Lang, too, had found a measure of peace. It wasn't the peace he had sought all those years, but it was something he could work with. He had no choice but to accept the reality of his place in the family. The inheritance, though important, was no longer the thing that defined him. It was something far more valuable, the chance to build his future with integrity, free from the weight of past mistakes. Miss Rowland had begun the slow process of rebuilding her own life. She had been an outsider for so long, but now, in the quiet aftermath of the truth, she found a place for herself. She had never sought forgiveness, she had never needed it, but now she saw that she had a part to play in the Marshwood family's future. The past was gone, but the future remained.